Hi, I'm Joe James, and I've won two 12-hour ultra marathons so far this year. And I wanted to share with you some of my keys to success in ultra marathons. Now, I'm not a professional runner, I'm a running enthusiast, but I've trained like crazy for the last 6 months to prepare for these ultra marathons. And I'm going to focus in this video on three specific areas that I see a lot of people fail. So one is training, two is pacing, and three is nutrition. So first, let me talk about training. It is important to do a lot of miles. I feel like your success in an ultra marathon is highly dependent upon how many weekly miles you do, and especially time on feet. You need to get miles in. They don't have to be fast miles, just slow miles is fine. I don't really push any speed at all, but I do a lot of miles. So training for these two races, what do I mean by a lot of miles? Well, I probably did at peak up to 90 miles in a week, but I sustained for several weeks about 75 plus miles a week. A lot of miles, I think, makes a big difference when you're talking about running a 12-hour ultra marathon. You have to condition your body to sustain those long endurance runs. And putting a lot of weekly miles on your legs makes a big difference in your training. And it's also important to run on tired legs. So normally for marathons, you're more focused on speed, but in ultra marathon, it's more about endurance than speed. So you typically for marathon training, you'll do a long run once a week. And I did the same thing for ultra marathons, and I recommend it. A long run every 5 to 7 days. And for me, a long run is typically 20 miles, but sometimes more. I did, the longest long runs I did were 25, 26 miles and a couple weeks before the race. But I also did, it's key, I think, to get in back-to-back long runs, what ultra runners call back-to-back long runs. So typically after a long run, if you're training for a marathon, you would rest the next day so your legs can recover. But when you're training for an ultra, you actually want to run on tired legs. So you may run 20 miles today and do another 15-mile day tomorrow. And I did that a bunch. Some people even recommend doing 20 plus 20 in one day apart. So you get rest overnight, your body recovers some, but not fully recovered. And then you run another 15 or 20 miles. So back-to-back long runs definitely helps you. But intensity of training is important. At the same time, you have to avoid injury. So high weekly mileage and long runs and back-to-back long runs were what helped me a lot. Number two, pacing. So a lot of people fail in pacing in marathons and in ultra marathons, but especially in ultras, because they probably underestimate how long 12 hours is. And in your training, you really don't do anything remotely close to 12 hours. My longest training runs are 3 to 4 hours, the longest ones. So it's pretty tough to figure out what the right pacing for a 12-hour race is. But the key really is to be able to last for 12 hours, you have to start out slow. The key is to start out slow, and more likely than not, you'll slow down throughout the race rather than speeding up. So for me, what do I mean by slow? My marathon pace is 8:30. I can run a 3-hour 45 marathon. So it's 8:30, 8 minutes, 30 seconds per mile. When I ran the past two 12-hour ultras that I won, I was shooting for a 12-minute mile pace. So considerably slower, like 3.5 minutes slower than my marathon pace. So I could start out at 9 minutes if I wanted to, and I'd feel perfectly comfortable running at a 9-minute pace for a few hours. And after that, my legs would start to weaken. I would slow down considerably. In the second half of the race, I'd be in a lot of trouble. So if I pace myself I start out in my ultras, in the 12-hour ultras, I start out at a pace around 10.5, 10:30. And increase to like 11 and then up to 12. And then towards the end of the race, I'm going 13 minutes per mile. So that's what I've done the past two races that has worked for me. My plan actually was to start around 11 for the first 20 miles, around 12 minutes for the next 20 miles, and around 13 for the last 20 miles. And if I could do that, an average of 12 minutes per mile throughout the race, would give me a 60-mile total distance for 12 hours. And that was my plan. I didn't quite make that in either race, but I did manage to win the race, and I think my pacing wasn't too far off the mark. I did pretty well at pacing myself, and I didn't really bunk. I didn't really bunk in either race, and I didn't really, my speed didn't slow down dramatically. It slowed down a little bit throughout the race. But pacing is key. You need to figure out what works for you. Don't base your pace on a marathon pace. Start yourself out slow, and if you have extra steam left towards the last few hours, then you can increase your speed if you really feel confident. But it's most important that you last for 12 hours rather than just getting a few fast hours of running in. And the last thing I want to talk about is nutrition. So in nutrition, I like to think of the big three: water, electrolytes, and carbohydrates. And getting the right amount and the right balance of all three of those in is key. If you don't have them all three, you're going to have problems. You're either going to have stomach cramps, you're going to get dehydrated, you're going to bonk and run out of energy and fade out in the second half of the race. So a lot of things can go wrong, or you can have cramps, like muscle cramps in your legs. So getting the right amount of water, electrolytes, and carbs is really the big three, the most important things for nutrition in a race. So you have to figure out how to get those, right? You can just drink water, or you can drink your favorite sports drink like Gatorade or Powerade, which has the electrolytes already integrated into it. And then the same for carbs, right? You can either eat food, or you can get liquid carbs, or you can use some of my favorites for the carbs is to use these GU and also blocks. I eat blocks and GU. I don't like them, but they're convenient because they're fast. They don't require a very long stop. I can carry a couple of them in my pocket and chomp on the blocks or suck down a GU while I'm racing, and I don't have to chew or anything. So they're convenient. They're pretty quick and convenient, and they have a fair number of carbs, and they're also loaded up with electrolytes that helps my electrolyte balance stay up. And then for water, I personally don't drink very much water. I try to drink more Powerade in the race so that I get electrolytes and carbs with that. But look, however you do it, you have to figure out your own nutrition plan. Make sure you're getting enough water, electrolytes, and carbs. And the more you're sweating, the more water and electrolytes you're going to need, because you're going to bleed those out fast if you're sweating a lot. So on hotter races, you're going to need a lot of water and a lot of electrolytes. And you can start loading on carbs and electrolytes 2 days before the race. Okay? So I take some electrolyte supplements, just the salt capsules, and also eat bananas, starting about 2 days before the race, to get your body kind of loaded up on carbs and electrolytes. And then even right before the race, I continue to eat bananas and Gatorade to get my electrolytes and carbs up. Early in the race, you need to make sure you're drinking and eating enough. If you wait until the last part of the race or the last 3 or 4 hours of the race and decide that you're running low on energy or you're getting dehydrated, you're in deep trouble. So you have to do this early in the race. So in the first 3 to 6 hours, it's essential that you're eating and drinking enough and getting the carbohydrates and the electrolytes and the water in your system to replace what your body is going to use up throughout the race. If you get behind on this, if you get behind on your nutrition early in the race, you'll never catch up, and you're going to have a dismal second half of the race. It's just not going to go well for you. So make sure you start early in the race, shoveling in food and drink, whatever it is that you're going to take. Make sure it's easy to digest. Your stomach can handle it. Later in the race, you may have stomach cramps, you may have stomach pains, you may feel nausea. You may not be able to eat or drink anything. Also, it takes your body time to absorb these things, a couple hours to absorb carbs and electrolytes. So get them in your system early. Don't wait until the end of the race or until you feel thirsty or you feel like you need these things. Put the nutrition into your body early and throughout the race. So what I did in my 2 12-hour ultras is I started shoveling in bananas and carbohydrates and electrolytes and water days before the race, but especially in the couple hours just before the race. And then in the first 6 hours, basically every 2 mile lap, I was eating something, a goo, a couple of the blocks, or something, right? Or a few bites of banana. But I was shoveling in something every couple miles throughout the first half of the race just to make sure that I got some nutrition in. And even though my body didn't want it, and I kind of felt like throwing up every time I look at those darn goos. But you have to get those calories in your system early in the race, in your stomach, so that you have time to process and digest that. And anticipate that you're going to probably feel some nausea later in the race, and you're not going to feel real hungry. So I hope these 3 things help you. Again, I'm not an expert trainer or professional runner, but I have won 2 12-hour ultra marathons this year that I'm really jazzed about. And these are some training tips that I hope will help you. And if this is useful, please click like and subscribe to my channel. Thanks.